Ever wondered how AI is transforming the creative world? From building AI-powered design tools to becoming more creative in the workplace. We'll unpack the fascinating insights about how artificial intelligence is enhancing human creativity, not replacing it. You'll discover why getting bored might be the secret to unlocking your creative potential, how AI walks can spark innovation, and why critical thinking is more crucial than ever in this AI-driven world. Whether you're a designer, a tech enthusiast, or simply curious about how AI is reshaping creativity, this episode will change how you think about the future of design. Welcome to Emerging Tech Unpacked, a podcast series about setting the record straight on emerging tech myths and profiling the career stories of incredible women leaders in STEM. My name is Lucy Lin, and today we'll be unpacking the fascinating topic of generative AI design with the head of design for generative AI at Canva, CJ Jones. Hello, my name is Lucy Lin, and today we'll be unpacking generative AI design with our expert, CJ Jones, who's the head of design for generative AI at Canva. She's actually a repeat guest, having appeared on a previous live podcast episode. Welcome back to Emerging Tech Unpacked, CJ.
Oh, and thank you so much for having me, Lucy. I'm excited to be here and chat through all the great questions I know you're going to have.
Yeah. Well, I just think that when you were on our last live episode, you had such interesting insights. The audience certainly were very excited to hear from you and all your insights. And I think it would be great to have another episode today to go and dive deeper into what generative AI design is and also a little bit more about your career. So shall we get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yay. So I'd love to start, and if you can provide perhaps a 2-minute overview of your career today and how you became the head of design for Gen AI at Canva, that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. So I started out as a creative that didn't know where to fit in, actually. I wanted to do film. I wanted to do lots of different things. And I ended up actually working in advertising as an art director, where we were doing design, writing, strategy, business strategy, all of those things in between. And at the time, I realized I wanted to be in tech more. It was really evolving. This was when Facebook was first becoming a household name and social networks were really booming. So I wanted to do that. And I started working in startups as a designer, different marketplaces that people would use, different things that required a lot of search and recommendations. And so that's how I started getting into AI, because at the core of it, AI is machine learning and how it can do really, really rapid math. And from there, I worked in an AI research institute, the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence. I worked on natural language processing, which is how do machines understand words and how we write and how humans talk. And then transitioned into more roles using machine learning, search, recommendations. And then now I'm here at Canva, actually working on a lot of our generative AI features that you might know as from Magic Studio. So Magic Write, Magic Media, Magic Design, all of these tools that are meant to help people do those sticky parts of the design process. And that's how I got to where I am today. A lot of trial and error, really.
Oh, I think that's an incredible career. Don't think it's a lot of trial and error. I mean, you're moving into a direction of where the future's going, being in machine learning, in data, in design as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you actually do on a day-to-day basis? Like, what is Gen AI design at Canva?
Yeah, definitely. So on my team, it can really vary day to day, but a lot of it is, okay, we have this technology, maybe it's a model that we've updated or something new that's out there on the market. And we look at it and say, how and would this solve a typical Canva user's problem? Is it something that would be useful to them? And if it is useful, where would that be in part of the process, the design process for them? So through that, we would look at how would we actually design this so people could use this. We look at it across, their desktop experiences and their mobile experiences. And so a lot of that day to day is us as a team looking at designs, critiquing it. Maybe we're even prototyping stuff to see, does it work or not? And then it's that final moments when we're actually building it and getting into the product and seeing how people are reacting to it and what they have to say, and just continually iterating from there.
Wow. So it sounds like it's a lot of like data research, looking at user data, and then product, as in building something that according to what your users are using and making it better and more appropriate for them. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of user research that we do. We'll try prototypes with them. We'll interview people. And it's really about, this is such a new and emerging space, and we want to make sure it's useful as well. So, that's the reason why Magic Write, when you're typing up a doc in Canva, it appears when you highlight text, because that would be the most useful time, right? Rather than it being somewhere else in the product. So we think through a lot of those considerations as a designer.
Yeah, wow. I have to ask you, how did you know about like all these things? Is it because you can see it, as I'm a user of Canva, how do you see that? Like, how do you see that this is what I'm using or what I'm using it for, etc.?
It's actually more what people tell us. That's how we'll know. So we will sit down and talk to them and say, can you show me how you use Canva today? Can you maybe make a design for me so I can see what you're doing? And along the way, we're looking at, okay, this part of the process is really hard. And then we'll ask people, is this part of the process actually hard, or do you enjoy it? Like, for example, a lot of people really like scrolling endlessly. Like we would see in the data on the website, like, oh, people are spending a lot of time here. But then when we would interview users, they were saying, this is actually how I'm getting inspiration. And I do actually enjoy scrolling through here. Some people don't. Some people are like, I just want to get a design, get a template and get going. But some people do enjoy that. So that's why we like to talk to users, because then we can understand maybe parts of the process don't need to be so automated. Maybe this is where people are getting enjoyment. So that's the importance in design, always having research and user information to back it up.
Yeah, fascinating. Didn't realize that, obviously design is all full of research and user design as well. So interesting. I also love the creative process as well. So, and loved what you were talking about, design and creativity. Can you talk a little bit more about what creativity means to you? And also, what's your typical creative process when you're trying to think of a new idea or project?
Yeah, I would say that creativity to me is expressing that whatever you have as your imagination in your brain, and only you can take whatever is in your brain and put it onto paper or screen or anything like that. Technology isn't that far yet. We're not, projecting our brains onto screens.
You're putting a chip in my head to see what I'm thinking.
But we're not that far down. But so that creativity is also, how do you do that? How do you learn to do that? Maybe your idea changes as you're going through the process and you're executing on it. And so all of those pieces are really important to the creative process. So for me in my own process, I actually work best when I have a lot of disparate information. I don't like to get stuck in a silo or a rabbit hole. So even if I have a project that's, let's say, about, improving Magic Write, normally what I would do is then say, well, let me look at things that are not a writing tool. Let me look at video games. Let me look at other things. And I'm just actually repeating what one of our designers did. Let me look at video games. Let me look at, it's concept designs that are coming out, even from cars, from all these different places, to gather inspiration for what should I do next and how should I solve this. And so I think that messy part is really important for my creative process. Is I love to gather lots of information. I like to read lots of different things, even if it's not for right now, it'll click further down the line. And then in the process, I'm kind of, for myself, I have a race against the clock of, I'll get bored of this idea, so I need to get it done quickly. So I like to be really rapid and either sketch it out or prototype it or do something to get it into that execution state of the creative process. Otherwise, I'll lose steam and I won't be excited by the idea anymore, and I'll move on to the next one.
So I've been accused, because I really like trivia, and I'm quite good at general knowledge, because I like to read a lot. I listen to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks, and like to think I'm a fairly learned person, and hence why I like going to trivia. But you're telling me it's actually a good skill to have because
Definitely.
maybe I'm more creative as a result because I've read I like reading very widely different things. I love history. I love economics, love technology. And that's actually good for creativity. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think especially for my creative process, I think the creative part is you have all this information. So how do you make those connections between things? And maybe they don't feel related, but you can gather some truth, some inspiration, something from them to keep moving forward or come up with even a new idea.
Yeah, that's good. Very good.
Yeah.
And how do you foster all this creativity and innovation within teams and organizations?
Yeah, I think the biggest aspect for this and the biggest, if you're in a team that is trying to have more innovation, is around allowing one for more failure. Typically in teams, we want to put forward the best proposal, the best ideas, and that's just not how creativity and innovation thrive. You actually need to test a lot. You need to fail a lot. You need to have a lot of bad ideas even and filter those down as you're going. And that's just not how a lot of companies work or corporations, and naturally as people too, we want to put our best foot forward. So I think as anyone in the space, it's fostering that environment to see failure as learning, not as failure. And then the other thing is also too to really reward people who are being creatively brave. So if they put forward really bad ideas and they say, I know this is a bad idea, but I'm just throwing it out there in case it sparks something for someone else, that's much better than not saying anything at all. Because then who knows, someone hears that and they think of something different, and maybe that's the best idea the team has. So I think those two things are very interrelated in terms of embracing failure and also celebrating when people are brave about that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree there, because in terms of celebrating failure, like how are you supposed to ever learn if you are always, well, you can learn, I guess, if you're doing always right. But then I think you'll learn the most when you have a failure and you're like, okay, so how can I improve for next time? I know that myself, whenever something's not happened, I've actually learned my failure, mistake. And then I feel like I can improve 2 times better than previously. So I agree with you there. And I used to work in the strategic design and development team for a financial services company. And we used to dedicate at least an hour every week to kind of brainstorm and think about, product improvements every single week. And I think, that's how we become more creative and also, working towards what customer wants. But like you were saying there, I think minimizing the bureaucracy of things, I think is really important. The team that I was in was kind of like a startup within a very large ASX, which is, the Australian Fortune 500 type, company. And we actually even moved our office, not in the mothership of the big tower. We actually moved one street away, and it was just our team, because we wanted to foster that innovation and that autonomy that isn't, in that company, in that wider, more organization. And I think that's how maybe even startups are great, is because, that's how they're able to move faster and think more, because they have that bit of autonomy, and then also be able to have more creativity and able to innovate faster as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like if a startup messes up something, it's seen as, it's fine. They're a startup versus, a Fortune 500 or public company. Yeah. And there's quite a lot more that they're accountable for. Yeah. But that's really interesting, even the separate space. Our team also around Canva, we're different offices in Surrey Hills, and our team as well. We have a dedicated space, and we work with other teams that are using machine learning as well, so we can share across the board. But yeah, even something as small as the same way that you would celebrate the launch of something, you would celebrate someone saying, hey, I decided not to roll out this new product improvement because it's not going to be helpful, it's not working, and having an equal amount of celebration for both.
Yeah, fascinating. So how do you define generative in the context of artificial intelligence? Because we're here to talk about Gen AI design. And if you can explain it, like to a 10-year-old, that would be great.
Yeah,
and
sure.
How do you also apply it to the different various creative disciplines too?
Yeah, definitely. So generative AI is basically taking from many different sources of data, lots of context, understanding. So that way, if you as a person ask this generative AI to make you something, it can make it from scratch. It's not, just copying an image and changing it a little. It is trying to make something incredibly unique. And so what that can be used for, you've probably seen around on the news, is like it can generate images, it can music, even voiceovers, text. In Canva, you can do designs. So it can make lots of different things. And that's why it's just a very interesting space, because it does need a lot of that data to make these new things, which, brings up the question of like, where's this data coming from? Whose data is that? That's the basic part of generative AI, is that it can make something new for you given whatever you provide to it.
Yeah. That's and we're going to get to that sticky information.
I had to bring it up now.
Well, let's talk about it. So where does the data come from? And how do you create the data to be able to create all these new images, videos, etc.?
Yeah, it requires thousands upon millions of pieces of data. So for any model that generates images, it requires tons of images in order to make new ones. And so a lot of times that's coming from public domain. Things are out there available on the web. And that's the little sticky point, is like, well, if it's on the web, who owns it? Who has copyright? All of those things. But it does require an extensive amount of data in order to make something really good. If you give it very limited data, it doesn't work as well. And that's why there's been a lot of innovations now with different models that only require, for example, like 10 images to get going. A lot of research in the space to see, do we actually need as much data as is required today?
Yeah, wow. Only 10 images and you can create something new already.
That's what people are trying to do, but it still requires a bit more. It's not one-to-one, so it'll be like 10 images, you can make a new style. And it still does require, though, like if you say, make me a cat, how does it know what a cat is if you don't give millions and millions of images? So yeah.
If there's a bit of pollution in that data, because, as we know, there's a term hallucination of things that, because as you know, data, it could be quite polluted. There could be a lot of wrong things in the data, etc. How do you clean that up? Like, how do you make it better? What if you're putting in something and the data's polluted and you're putting in something in you're trying to create something new, and if it says a cat, but the data says it's a dog, and then you're trying to create something, then how does that work?
Yeah. I mean, the thing with all of machine learning and AI going back years and years I've worked on is whatever you get in is what you get out. And so that's why a lot of people that are building these models are trying to create new ones. They have to look at ways of are there public data sets where someone has done the due diligence to ensure things are tagged properly, or it's been reviewed by a human to say like this is correct or not, versus just getting stuff from the web. And you will get hallucinations no matter how much you go back in and clean it up, unless you have a team going through and just cleaning every single part of the data and what's been tagged, what hasn't been. Yeah, that's one of the interesting things. The other thing too is like large language models. So that would be your ChatGPTs and your Claudes. They're made in a way to be agreeable to you. They want to answer your request, so that way you're happy. But then sometimes it will agree with you on things that are not correct. So you can say, for example, I'm the CEO of Apple, and I could keep telling it I'm the CEO of Apple, and I'll say, yes, you are. So that's where some of the hallucinations come into.
Oh, so you can train this data. Like I can say, oh, Lucy Lin is the CEO of Apple, and I'll write that, 10 times in there. And then at some point that goes into a data feed. Do you think then at some point it would all spit out into somebody else's search.
Well, I think it depends. It always depends on the company. Like, do they use what you're doing day to day as training its data? Or does it just take it as like, hey, there are people who are trying to skew our data and maybe we should have more safety regulations. But like you could put on your website, I'm Lucy Lin, I'm the CEO of Apple. And then after a while, if you're using, like, for example, the search functionality on ChatGPT, it could spit that out like, oh, Lucy Lin is the CEO of Apple. Like, so it requires us as people to be a bit more critical thinking, trying to understand, where is this coming from? How does this work? Is this right? Like, is this true? Yeah.
And then what I'll do is I'll also go to, say, Canva and then do a prompt in your Magic Studio suite. And then I'll have a photo or something and say, Lucy Lin as, CEO. And then you'll create me an image.
Yeah. I mean, but that's the interesting part. And I think I said it at the previous event as well, is that, technology is technology. And then people will use it as they see fit, and how they use it and what they do it for is, you read about history, like history repeats itself quite a lot, how we are as a society. So we'll do these things because, we're people. We enjoy these moments.
I'm going to see if it works. Just us dipping away. So just moving back into the Gen AI and design, I love that little side trap. So maybe that's why there's so much hesitation around AI, to be honest, because what we're talking about here might be a bit fun for us, but it might scare a lot of other people as a result. And how do you think, and not only that, like, what I also see with generative AI design, it's so easy for users like myself, who is not a designer and not an artist. I can go in and go to any of these large language models and, platforms and things like that to just easily create, prompt an image, prompt videos, prompt, whatever else, text, etc. Then they're probably also fearing a bit of job loss as well, because, that could be somebody else's livelihood. So I'd like to hear from you, from a designer and artist perspective, how should designers and artists effectively think about AI and also maybe collaborate with them, so it would actually become better as a creative process rather than thinking that it's going to steal their jobs?
Yeah. And I think, in my personal opinion as well, I think it's fair to be worried just because of, how the laws are with copyright, how this data has been used. It's hard to attribute. This is a big challenge for tech now, is how can I attribute that you, Lucy, who is the artist of this picture, you own this and it was used in 5 different ways by someone generating images. And so therefore, you're entitled to this amount of compensation because it was used in these ways. That's a very tricky problem to solve. And so I understand why people have hesitations around that. And especially you put your craft and your time into this process and then someone replicates it for, little to nothing. It can be very worrying. But I think that in terms of technology, at every technological wave, this has also happened, especially like when the television came out, people were worried about what does this mean for the artistry that we put into radio and what we put into writing, and this will get replaced. So I think that this is a normal and very valid response as technology changes. I think, though, for artists and designers to look at it and say, how it's another piece of technology, so how can I use this in my process in a way where I am currently lacking, or I would like a little bit more inspiration or ideation. And it's also 100% fair if those designers and artists say, like, I don't want to use it at all, then that's good. That's, more power to you. For me, the way I've found it most helpful for myself and on our team and the way that people are trying it out is that, how can this help me in the parts where I feel a bit more stuck. So maybe as a designer, sometimes I struggle with writing, and that's when I'll use a large language model to help me with like, hey, I'm thinking about writing something in this way. Should I do it in this way or that way? Or even to give ideas and say, here's my ideas for this. Can you give me 5 different viewpoints on this idea? So I'd like someone who loves it, someone who hates it, someone who would be in the middle, just so I can get different perspectives to understand if this is a good idea to go ahead with or not. And even on a personal side, I've actually been using, image generators, Magic Media or Leonardo to kind of explore styles and moods and things that I normally wouldn't actually go for. It's not normally something I would gravitate towards in my style or my taste, but I do it so that way I can see like, oh, I understand why this is really beautiful, or I can see the application for this. It's kind of like I'll give very bizarre and abstract prompts just to see what comes out of it too, to see, oh, this is how this model interpreted this. That's very interesting. And maybe it sparks a new idea for me. So yeah, I think it can really depend on the artist and the designer and how they use it. And you'll see from other people as well, there are artists that are influencing models and how they're built as well. So I think there's a lot of application for creative people.
Well, I love going to art galleries because I think I see a lot of different styles. As someone who's an art appreciator, cannot draw to save my life. Draw stick people. But I do love art and I appreciate art. And I love going to art galleries because you get to see the different styles. And so I'm thinking using something like, AI, large language models and all these other tools can help just explore a few more different styles that you may or may not have thought about, as you were saying, So I think that's really interesting. And then, and I hope that, and like you said, I use it more for brainstorming as well and kicking off ideas. And, I definitely want to make sure that there's a lot of human input that's in there as well. Nothing will ever replace the human voice.
Yeah.
And human creativity. I think, in my opinion, we're definitely nowhere near there yet, or ever will be, likely. And so for me, I think it's just a good starting point. Definitely not the end all, but it's like, you kick off beginning and then it's definitely not anywhere near the finished product, but it's just something that you can play around with and you refine it, get better, etc.
Yeah, definitely. Like one way I've been exploring how to be better at writing is, I write something in a very rough way and then I say, can you write this in more of a literary way? Can you write this in more of an informal way? Can you write this in just different styles? So then I can see like, oh, this is how a potential sentence could be structured. And then I learn from that as well. So I agree with you. I find the brainstorming aspects the best part for using AI with.
Yeah, I actually, I've also put in things like explain, this tech to me in like, as you're explaining it to say a 5-year-old, and then you get, the answer and it's like, talking about toys or something.
Yeah.
And they say, explain it to me to a 7-year-old. And then you can see the language actually develop more. And then you say, explain it to me as a 10-year-old. And then it gets even better. And then you go, oh, explain it to me as an adult. And then, and so it's actually quite good in terms of using these tools to kind of just say, oh, you can actually have different perspectives and different ideas, different styles. And then, because like I think we forget as adults talking to another adult, not every single adult has the same understanding or learning of what we know. And even I've been playing with things like that, like different ages has been quite good as well. Just to make tech more easier and less complex.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's so many different interesting things. Like, you spoke a bit about Magic Studio, and just so I'm a Canva user. I think Magic Studio is a bit of a game changer for me and my creative process. I definitely use it to kick off a lot of all my ideas and just, and it's just made my workflow a lot more efficient. So I have a podcast, I create content, I'm in marketing. All these things have made my productivity, I think, better, which I think is been good. Like I've reduced my time that I need to spend on it, which and it's also a lot easier for me to use as well, which I think is fantastic. But is there really any other innovative applications or trends that you're seeing that you think is really cool?
Yeah, I think that one of the new and emerging spaces, and it'll be interesting to see how it evolves, is how it can help teach, like you said, teach children or teach others certain concepts. So I've seen applications where you can have a bit of a voice back and forth, like going through a homework problem or something like that and having it explained to you in a way that, like, potentially as a parent, you might not be able to, like, I don't know, trigonometry or beyond that in years and years, right? So I find that application really cool because it's, there's a set curriculum, there's different ways to learn. And so you can even prompt, like, I'm more of an auditory learner or a visual learner, so explain it to me in that way more. I find that very exciting. And I think there will be a lot more other applications in, like, the medical space, for example, to be able to help clinicians. We're all such different people. There's so much research out there, and, they're running from patient to patient. And so being able to help give support in that way as well. And of course, I think the image, the video models, all these diffusion models are really evolving quite rapidly. So I can't wait to see what will happen. I don't even know what's going to happen yet. We'll see.
I definitely want to hear more about that. So let's talk about some of the negative things. So can't get away from this topic without talking about, we spoke a bit about data already, but what are other ethical considerations that you think we should keep in mind when using some of these tools?
Yeah, definitely. I think the big one that's in the news right now and what people will be reading about is the environmental impact, which is actually anything we use with technology. Even just opening your laptop, using your phone requires some amount of energy. It requires a data center somewhere powering up, and generative AI also uses that energy as well. And so I think as you're using it and exploring it, it is thinking about, what are those implications that can happen. I think, though, because of climate change and everything happening in the world, there is and will be a call to arms of, like, how do we actually become more green with technology? Even here in Australia, right? There are precious metals that we need to build computers that we have to mine. So AI isn't outside of those ethical considerations as well when we're using them.
Yeah. And I just, because nobody really thinks about the back end type of stuff, right? So they just think, I'm just going to prompt this question in there and then it will just happen. But there are so many things that's happening in the background. And certainly, the data center and the sustainability and the climate question over AI is definitely something that a lot of people have been talking about, and needing to, how is everyone going to store this data, all those chips you were mentioning too? I know that there's been connotations about mining, but there's definitely also positive things about it. Like, a lot of our mobile phones won't work if we don't have one of those items, from mining. So yeah. And can you tell me a little bit more about, one of the questions that I always think about is, how do you respond to critics who argue that relying on AI really diminishes the value of creativity and design? Because I think that's also something that a lot of people think about too, or criticize AI for.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it goes back to that the technology is what it is, and the technology is what it is, and then how people use it is a very different method and moment. So I think the critics are fair and right to do so, because we should question why and when we would want to use AI and how is it actually helping the creative process. I think a lot of what we see in the news is people looking at it as a way to replace humans, gain more money, which is fair for critics to say, like, hey, that's not what we should go forward with as a society. That's not what we should value as well. We should value human creativity, and it can be augmented with machines, with AI, with different technology. The same way, movies have evolved, right? They used to be filmed in a certain way. They used to be black and white, and we've evolved now to having, CGI and high definition. You can see everything on their face. So I think that it's fair for critics to say that. And then I think it's also on us to say, we still value something that's human made over something that's AI made. I think that's what people's worries are, is that anything AI made will be inherently more valuable. But I think what will happen actually is that human made things will be even more valuable. The same way handmade things are more valuable because it's not made in a factory, or anything like that.
Yeah. Do you think that you were talking about movies. I just want to touch on that point. So I read somewhere that the movie Everything All You Can See, hang on, what's the title of that film?
Everything Everywhere All at Once. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it was a very small budget film, and they used a lot of AI tools. Part of the film was using AI tools, and they did the entire movie on just like 3 people or something very small. And so I think in that sense, people will be like, oh my God, our roles or our jobs are kind of like being replaced because now you can use all this technology and only hire just 3 people. Whereas previously, maybe the big movie studios would need, a team of 25 and, things like that. So I think people might have that ethical consideration saying, well, how can you replace, some of these roles, et cetera, as a result. But then you also talked about the whole human creativity part of things. But, I think that film looks incredible. And I think they've struck the right balance. But then there are some films that I've seen that is just too much CGI and too much, special effects. And it looks awful. Like I couldn't connect with it whatsoever because I'm like, oh my God, this doesn't even look human, to be honest. I feel like it's very alien or very weird looking. And I think there is that balance, between a good level of what I can tolerate and maybe as we get more and more entrenched with AI, my tolerance level goes higher and higher and higher. But I think still right now, I still really value the human side of things. As you say, like I love handmade stuff. I'd still buy lots of mass manufactured clothing as an example. Can't always buy knitted handmade clothes, but when I do, like I really value it. And I think a lot of people do also feel that too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, as more and more people use AI, we'll start becoming aware of what is AI generated and that person put no time or thought into it versus it is AI generated, but it does have that human quality, that human touch to it. And I think we'll start discerning that too, because then we'll look at it as, oh, did you put that human connection? Like if you email me and it's AI generated and I can tell, then I understand what our connection is as people to people versus if it feels like, oh, there's errors, it's human made, or maybe it's just, it has your tone of voice. Yeah. I think that'll, that's the shifts we're seeing now, right? Where people look at stuff and say, this is AI generated, and it's actually not. It's just like, that was someone's art, but it might just look like it because of what we've seen around the internet.
Oh, wow. So you're saying that you can't even tell the difference anymore between someone who, what's AI generated versus what is actually humanly created?
Or even, I mean, that's possible, but there's also the inverse of someone saying you're making AI generated content and that creator saying it's actually not. I'm actually making this myself just because of the prevalence of it now. It's quite an interesting back and forth.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So do you believe that there should be limits on what types of content generative AI can actually produce? And if so, where do you see the line should be drawn at?
I think, again, this one is really tough, the technology and human question, which is, of course, there's things that we should definitely block that, emphasizes or promotes like hateful stereotypes or misinformation, all of those things, like the base core level, we know that shouldn't be done. But then there is a bit of a gray area where it's that person's intent and what they plan to use that for. And are they just exploring? Are they going to make money off of it? There's just so many considerations in that line. It's like if I'm a teacher and I'm teaching people about Vincent van Gogh's style, and I ask my students, think of something that you have in your household and generate that in Van Gogh's style, or we can paint it together, depending on that lesson. Like I would say, yeah, then they're just using this to learn they should use it. But if I'm a person generating Vincent van Gogh like things and then selling it, that would be a line, right? But I think different cultures, different contexts will all have different lines for what that should be. So I think that'll be an interesting piece coming up, or discussion that we'll have to have this, culture, society. Where are those lines for us?
Yeah. And don't you think like globally different lines are being drawn differently as well? Like maybe what we can tolerate in Australia is different to how you tolerate it in the US versus how you might tolerate it in China or Russia or Brazil, So I think...
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Even in Australia, right? Like we, and I'm learning too, is like moving here, like the importance and the significance of Aboriginal art. So as someone who knows that, I would know I would never generate something to look in the style of that, right? But if I'm a random person across the globe and I don't know that context and I see the style and do that, I don't know that line. That person doesn't know that line yet, and understanding that. So I think that's having that, understanding that nuance and educating others of like, hey, I understand you find this cool, but there's some significance behind this, and this is why it's not okay to do that. Well, it'll be we're a very connected society now, so it'll be interesting how much debate we have about this.
Yeah. I like to see some guidelines somewhere. And speaking about some guidelines, so I'm kind of interested in the regulatory perspective of the whole generative AI design space. You alluded to copyright previously. Here's where we're going to ask about that. How do you see our laws keeping pace with the rapidly evolving technology? And what roles do you think policymakers and tech companies should play in this very tricky situation of who owns what? Like, copyright versus ownership versus the user. Like, who owns this?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the role of governments, to champion the people, champion their rights, champion what makes sense for us as a society. I think for lawmakers, in order to understand why these things happen, you have to be quite unknowledgeable of tech. And I think that's the gap that is somewhat closing, as, governments will call upon different advisors or people who are in the industry to provide their perspective, even companies as well, to say, this is what we do and don't do with AI, to give that input. But it does seem like it's much more open and there's much more discussion and debate about it, rather than just a government saying, we'll make our laws and just, you have to deal with them. A lot of governments are trying to understand, how does this work? What does this do? And I think the governments that will always be ahead of us is the EU in terms of regulation and protections for consumers. So the EU AI Act will be kind of that first step for a lot of other governments to follow suit. Even in California, in the United States, because there's just so many tech companies there and so many people who were in tech, I find they're also a little ahead in terms of creating regulations because they have that knowledge as well.
Somebody has to step up and start, doing something about it, and hopefully the rest of the world will follow. But there's so much nuance with everything, and I think we just talked about some of those nuances, and people are going to start thinking I'm the CEO of Apple. It's like putting that into the ChatGPT and all that. Okay, so I'd love to hear more about you now and your career journey. So you're a leader in the Gen AI design space. I love, I'm an educator. I love skills, and love to also hear from you. What do you think are the most valuable skills to develop for designers in this AI-driven world?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest skill and when I reflect back on how I've grown, is developing that sense of curiosity and enjoyment in learning, because things will change very rapidly, especially with AI and technology. Even when I was working at the Research Institute, it wasn't at a state where it's like everyone could have access and we were using it. We had a computer that was running the model and we'd have to wait like a couple hours to see if what we did was right or not, like if it actually worked. We'd have to do like days of training just to see. So, but I did that job even though I wasn't qualified, probably, other than being a designer, because I was curious about the space. I wanted to learn more, and I showed that curiosity, enthusiasm, and I did my own research and continually advancing my knowledge. And so I think that's the biggest thing to learn. And as an educator, that's like our biggest thing as a teacher, is to instill that desire for knowledge as well.
Because I learn something new every day. That's my motto.
Exactly. And I think going back to earlier, that's being okay with failure, being okay with like, I'm not the best at this thing, but at least I've dove into the space enough and I learned about it and I have a general understanding, and now I can use that knowledge to apply it somewhere else.
What do you think about critical thinking?
Oh, that's the other big one. I'm glad you brought it up. I think critical thinking is a really key part here too. And in some of the studies that's actually come up, is that very early preliminary studies that people who really rely on AI every day have their critical thinking skills are actually diminishing, because they're just like, it's good at what it does. It knows everything. I'll just rely on that. And so I think that's another key skill, is like, I put something into the Chat GPT or Claude or any of these models, and it gives me back something and I go, is that actually right? Like, let's see if this is actually true or not, or to use it in ways where it's not agreeable. So like my favorite way to use it is I'll prompt it to like, give me a dissenting view, give me a contrarian view on this. Or even if you want to be really plain, you can just say, just be mean to me about this thing. So you're just not getting, you're just not getting like an agreeable tone to everything you're doing. And that helps you through that critical thinking aspect.
And that's a great way of using it. But don't you believe that Lucy Lin is the CEO of Apple? Yeah, because I think critical thinking is super important. The more and more things that is generated, and there's just so much noise and there's so much stuff, like, and you go, is this real? Is it not real? And sometimes I can't tell. I really can't tell. And so I think critical thinking is going to be a huge part, because it's so easy to create these days.
Yeah.
How are we supposed to know what is real or not? And then if people are just taking everything for granted and not doing any more, thinking critical thinking, or even just more research, or even just second guessing it.
Yeah.
I think even just a pause, second guess it. No, Lucy Lin's not the CEO of Apple. Then I think we are more human. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I think we're just trying to be more human, and, let's use our muscle. I think it's really important.
Definitely. It's the same as like with social media, right? People share stuff, like how we think about misinformation or news that seems true but not true. Like AI falls into that same boat as well.
100%. I'm like, sometimes I reply to my friend, I'm like, do you actually think this is real? Like, you're saying this to me. So friend does not have a critical thinking happen. So emerging tech is a very male-dominated industry. And hence why, I wanted to create this podcast, because, I want to kind of like increase the amount of equilibrium into this. I know that design, I think, is quite female friendly. Can you talk us a little bit more about the Gen AI design space?
Yeah.
Where's that looking like? And how's that going?
Yeah, I would definitely, especially in the AI space, machine learning, it's still quite male dominated. But what I do see more of is actually women, or, people that are outside of the typical norm, quote unquote, are making their own spaces actually. And then because of AI, they can actually do quite a lot more. So you can be a solopreneur or even your own founder, and you don't actually need a big team. Same as the example before with the movies, is that you're able to maybe even launch an app with not all the skills that would normally be needed.
Low code, no code products.
Exactly.
Things very quickly.
Exactly. So I find that women are actually moving into that space more because you have more freedom. You don't have to deal with these old rules or anything like that, and you can go forward. So I think that will be exciting as the space is growing. Now, of course, companies are changing and evolving and growing, and I'm like, that's why I really enjoy being at Canva, because a lot of our leaders are women. It's a very different from the tech companies that I worked in the US, where I've never had a female CEO to look up to, for example, or I've had a manager that was a woman as well. So it's been quite different. Like, companies can also evolve in the space. And as a woman, and you're in emerging tech and you're getting sick of it, well, luckily the technology is evolving so much, you can also do it yourself. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really interesting point. Like, using technology to build solo businesses. And I feel like there's a huge potential. To be honest, I'm building Emerging Tech Unpacked myself, and that's why I rely on a lot of AI tools to help me, because I've also got a job and I've got other things. This is a side hustle love project for me. So I rely a lot on AI tools so I can actually be more productive and produce things faster as well. So it's really an interesting insight that you mentioned that, because I 100% I agree, so just looking at myself. So
yeah.
So what do you find most exciting about the future of generative AI design? And where do you think this field will actually lead to? It's already quite evolved, but where's it going to even evolve to?
I think there's two things I'm excited about or on my mind. The first thing, more immediate, I think, is that as these tools evolve, I think more and more people will be able to actually build their own personal applications or websites or personal interfaces. Basically, maybe you're like, I want to make my own recipes and I only want it to have these ingredients and I want it to, be in this style of cooking because I like these, but not these others. And very easily you could make a tool that only you use day to day. And that's very exciting in the space, because people can actually make purposeful built things for themselves. Whereas what's hard as a designer is you're trying to design for everyone in the world and you want to make sure all of their needs are met. But there's often sometimes where it doesn't hit the mark. Like there's so many features that someone, even just my neighbor might want something very different from Canva than how I use it, right? So I think this personal usage, this personal apps will be quite exciting in that immediate term. In the longer term, though, I do think these models and everything will get so good that we'll basically be able to replicate what exists today. So all the websites, all the apps, all the technology that exists today. So what's that next thing like? And what's that next thing beyond what exists? So beyond VR, beyond, mobile devices, beyond voice recognition, like what's that
Beyond wearables.
Exactly. I think
maybe it's that brain chip you were talking about.
Like it could be that, but I think a lot of our everyday things that we have now might get to a point where AI can do that very easily. So then what's that next thing that we use our human creativity on? And I don't know what that is, but I'm excited to see that and build it too.
Ooh, all right. Well, I can't imagine it right now, but when you see it, you let me know.
Okay.
We're going to close on your number one tip to become more creative. Like, you are a designer, you think outside the box. What's your number one tip to think more creatively and thinking outside the box?
Well, I mentioned before about getting all that information right. I have a counterpoint to that, which is actually to be more creative, to think outside the box, is to really let yourself get bored. And that might be doing nothing. It might be going on a walk. It might be doing something else. But, we fill all our time now with and I'm guilty of this too. I love podcasts. I love audiobooks. I love to read. I want to watch things. There's so much information out there. And we don't really have a lot of moments where we get a bit bored and we let our mind wander and think through some of these things. And I found that when I give myself those moments, that's when more ideas come out of that. So if you can disconnect from certain things, like you have all this information, you've learned it all. Okay, that's great. But maybe just go sit and stare at a wall for 30 minutes and see what happens, what your brain comes up with.
You know what? I was just thinking, I love walking, and I find that my best ideas comes when I'm walking, actually. And I think there's something about the fresh air, the sunshine, and probably, as you're alluding to, like letting your mind wander, that my best ideas, I'm like, oh, I should do this and that and this and that. And then I'm like typing it down. I'm like, oh, no, I shouldn't be touching this mobile. But, but yeah, like, I agree with you. I think, letting your mind wander will actually become more creative as a result. And I think, I love that. I think that's a great way to close. I would say, what would I say is my number one tip to be more creative? Like, I don't know, like I think is to absorb as much, as possible. And I think when you absorb and then you go on a walk, and then that's when new things will happen. And I think, if we want to rely on AI, I think we're also talking about using it to come up, sparking new ideas, and maybe I'm using it as a bit of a collaborator with me as well. So, as someone who is building this podcast for myself, I use a lot of AI tools, like, to then help me think about new things. And I find that also gives me other ideas as well, because it's giving me other perspectives that I might not have thought of before. And I think that's also a really good thing.
Yeah, definitely. There's a new trend in Canva, and this is based off of a post that our CEO, Melanie Perkins, wrote about going on AI walks. So she goes on a walk, and then you can use AI to essentially take like whatever you dictated or any notes that you've had to kind of like clean it up. And so it's kind of become a thing we've been doing now, where it's like, I'll think this is a hard problem to solve. I'm going to go on an AI walk and, let my mind wander, think about it. And when it comes to me, I just, speak it into my phone, and then I have it there, and then I can keep walking and go about my day. So maybe that's also something people can try for their
Wow.
Yeah.
AI walk. I'm going to be doing that next time. Nice. So final question, how can others contact you? Because, you're fabulous, CJ.
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Christina CJ Jones on there. The one from Canva. There's many Christina Joneses in the world. And then I also have my website, jonesish.com. So JONESISH.com. And I have a blog there. I write about things, and you can see the other stuff that I've been working on, but also just all these, I have emerging tech on there. I have the live podcast, all of those. So yeah, you can reach out to me that way.
Amazing. Well, I reached out to CJ on LinkedIn, and I said, oh my God, you're fabulous. Can you come on our podcast? And she said, yes. So, it does work. And I just want to thank you for your time. I mean, I love learning more about generative AI, and I especially love the whole design and creative process. And I love talking about generative AI design. And CJ, thank you so much for your insights, for your time, for your knowledge, and fabulous banter.
Yeah.
So
thank you. Thank you so much for having me and, creating this space that way people can learn, but also women can feel inspired for what their next move is. So I really appreciate your time and energy and everything you're putting into this as well.
Thank you. Wow, what a great conversation with CJ. I loved exploring the intersection of AI and creativity, from demystifying AI's role in design to sharing insights about the future of creative tools. CJ has shown us how AI can enhance rather than replace human creativity. Here are my 3 key takeaways. Number 1, AI is becoming a powerful collaborator in the creative process, but there is plenty of room for human imagination. The future isn't about AI taking over. It's about enabling personal creativity where everyone can use tools customized to their needs. Number 2, curiosity and critical thinking will be essential human skills we need to acquire, use, and get better at as the technology rapidly evolves. And number 3, the gem worth remembering. Sometimes best creative insights comes from simply letting yourself get bored. Take those walks, disconnect, and let your mind wander. What are your thoughts about generative AI design? I'd love to hear more about it in the comment section. For more information about the latest episodes and how you can contact us for sponsorship, promotion, and guest speaking collaborations, visit our website, emergingtechunpacked.com. We are available in audio format on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and you can also watch us on YouTube, and we have bonus content there so you can keep learning. Make sure to subscribe, like, and follow us on our social media channels on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and Facebook to stay updated with the latest news and content. To contact me, you can find me on LinkedIn by searching for Lucy Lin. We welcome all feedback and will be very grateful if you can help us grow and spread the word by forwarding this episode to a friend and giving us a 5-star review. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope I've unpacked generative AI design for you to better understand this incredible new and emerging technology. See you in the next Emerging Tech Unpacked episode soon.